Welcome to another Apollo Papyrus episode. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For this episode, my interview guest is a public school fine arts teacher and the author of the Dark Throne series of dark fantasy novels, whose first book, Awakening the Dark Throne, was recently published on April 2nd, the day before this interview was recorded. Her name is Jessica Disciacca, and here's my interview with Jessica. Jessica Disciacca, welcome to Apollo Papyrus.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Sure. I am author Jessica Ann Disciacca, and I am a debut author of Awakening the Dark Throne that actually launches tomorrow with Austrian House Press. So I am pursuing my career as a traditionally published author. And on the side, I'm still currently teaching as well.
Note to our listeners, this interview will become available to listen to after Awakening the Dark Throne is released. And speaking of that, on April 2nd, the first book in the Dark Throne series, Awakening the Dark Throne, will be released. Without spoiling too much of the book or the series, what are Awakening the Dark Throne and the Dark Throne series about?
Sure. So Awakening the Dark Throne is a dark fantasy series. And what I have done is I have actually I enjoy reading history myself, or when my fantasy books are sprinkled with history that I can connect with through my education or whatnot. So I actually did a lot of study on Norse mythology, which is the mythology of which the elves came from. And they are actually referred to as Alfar. That was what the elves' names were originally were. So you are created and plunged into this Fey realm where you follow a main character, Genevieve, and she is a half-breed. She's half human, half elf, which is a death sentence to the Alfar. So any half-breed should be put down. They should never be born at this point. So when her sister, her human adoptive sister, gets taken by the evil dark court, she then sacrifices herself and risks her life and basically goes into indentured servitude to the light court in order to get into their lands and try to find a way to free her sister from the evil dark court. And along this time, she is plunged into a world where, she only has heard horror stories about from the humans. And she begins to realize, this is way more complex than we ever knew. And she meets friends along the way. She has a love interest along the way. When she arrives at the light court, she actually is chosen to be the future king's concubine, basically, or mistress, human mistress. And so during this time, she's kind of plunged into a love situation where he falls in love with her, and she's kind of using him at this point to make sure that she survives and to get to her sister. And so along this way, again, she learns that how evil the Alfar are, because in Norse mythology, they were not kind, even the fairies and things like that. They're not our Tinkerbell or anything like that. They were very vicious and evil. And she learns also, too, that there's even a greater threat. There's rifts opening up all around the realm that is allowing creatures from all different worlds inside. And so this is where I've kind of mixed realism with fantasy. I've incorporated monsters and creatures from Greek mythology, Roman mythology, different continents like Asia, all of the above. So these creatures are coming through and they're basically destroying their lands. And so at this point, the dark court and the light court are having to work together in order to do that. And once the dark court is introduced into the book, things begin to start unraveling for Genevieve, and she starts questioning who her father is, which is where she gets the elven blood from, because powers begin to manifest inside of her. And so she's very conflicted with that. But during Genevieve's mission, in order to get to her sister, she is put through a lot of trauma. She's put through a lot of abuse, very, real world realism things that you can connect to. So I would definitely encourage any reader to double check those trigger warnings just to make sure that you're, know what you're going into before you approach the book. And so at this point, by the end of the book, after she, basically she has to choose parts of herself that survive. And so is it her humanity, or is it the way, the will to live? And so she eventually chooses the will to live and kind of shoots humanity down the drain. And she does something very dramatic that leads to another dramatic act. And at the end of the book, you kind of find out who she is, and it leaves you with all these questions, and it opens up book number 2 to this whole new world, because you begin to start questioning what is really good, what is truly evil, and where, her powers are going to manifest and what's going to happen to her. So throughout the series, you're going to be introduced to a lot of characters. I do actually a lot of different jumping from character to character. So you're going to hear a lot of different voices, both male and female. You're going to, again, get to experience different worlds, different monsters, different religions, different creatures, some that you have heard of, some that you may have never heard of before. I did a lot of research on this book in order to make it very authentic, and to incorporate as many cultures and time frames and eras as I could. So it's action packed. There is some technology in it. There's a lot of politics. I love politics myself. Wanted to incorporate that. A lot of sarcasm, a lot of wit. So again, it has a little bit of everything for the wide viewer as well.
Now, just another note to our listeners: I am not piping in recorded audio of lightning. There is a thunderstorm outside where I live, but that does set the mood very well for dark fantasy.
Perfect. I love it. It's been raining over here too. So
now, how did the inspiration for Genevieve Autumn, who is your main character in Awakening the Dark Throne, come about?
So, me personally, and I have found this mostly to be true with majority of writers. Every character, main character that you write, and almost every character I would say that you write sometimes, but it basically is a representation of a part of you. So at this point, I have written 3 series, 2 of which are going to be published. I have Awakening the Dark Throne tomorrow on April 2nd, and then I actually have another one coming out, which is a True Aura in May. And so these 2 characters, main characters, have bits of me in them. And so I definitely wanted to incorporate, myself, because I feel like that's more of a genuine voice. Something too that's very important to me when reading a book is that I need the character to be like associated, like something that I can recognize, something that's relatable. And a lot of times, especially in fantasy, because again, it's fantasy, you can do whatever you want. You see these characters and all these people surviving, and you're like, there's no way you just went through this massive battle and everybody out of your 18 group family survived, right? Like that does not happen. So I definitely wanted to make it very relatable. And that actually, like, a lot of fans are already like, oh, why'd you do that to her? Or why did you, and so again, wanted to make her relatable. And then I started building this world off of her. So I knew I wanted her to have some type of weakness. And so that's kind of why I gave her, in this Fae world, I gave her half human, the half human blood. And if you do your research on what an Alfar is, elf again, in the Norse mythology, they did not have humanity because they lived so long. I almost kind of relate it to what, if you've like Lord of the Rings, how they were just very plain. They were like, no, their lack of emotion, very logical. Those are what they were created to be. And they were very much more logical based. They were, they didn't care. They knew humans were weaker. And so they took advantage of that. And so I wanted to kind of give her a weakness starting off, so she had somewhere to grow. And so that's why she's half human, half elf. And then at that point, the world kind of built around her. And so I had to start asking, what would motivate this character in order to sacrifice herself? And in the book, I've had positive reviews about this and negative. I think some people just like the idea of a fantasy book and being able to go about and, make your character basically untouchable, which again, I personally do not like, because I don't feel like that's relatable. But in the story, you watch Genevieve struggle, and that's kind of hard for some people. And so at points in time, she's very brave. She's very witty. She outsmarts the smartest person in the room. But then at other times, she is having a panic attack because of the trauma that she has experienced and the abuse that she has experienced. And so you watch her kind of do this yo-yo effect. And in book 2, for sure, book 2 and 3, she finds herself out of all this trauma. And that is kind of like my overall arching goal, is that, or my arching, I would say, mantra of this series is, do not let circumstances that are forced on you, or things that you've gone through, define you. Instead, turn around and weaponize it, and make it a part of yourself, and make it something that now you strive for and you live for, and it gives you power instead of it crippling you. So that's definitely something that you will experience as you go through this journey with Genevieve and watch her grow as a person, as a half breed. You watch her grow in her love triangle, and just all the decisions at this point that she makes.
You mentioned you have a second book series that'll begin to be published soon. What will your other book series be called? Because I didn't catch that at first. And without spoiling too much of it, what will it be about?
Yes. So this one, it's not so much, it's still fantasy. It's called Witches of Triora, and the first book is called The Vessel. And this one, again, I love religion. I took religious studies in college, and I fell in love with it. I was born in a Christian household, and that is definitely a part of me. But at the same time, like I wanted to know, why we believe in what we believe in. And, if somebody asked me why I believed in that, I just remember, okay, so for example, backstory a little bit. Mormons or atheists, a lot of times if I ever talked to an atheist as a young adult, I realized that they knew more about my religion than I did. And so that was like kind of disturbing to me. And I was always told, oh, just tell me you have faith. Well, no, like, why do I believe in what I believe in? And so that kind of sent me on a deep dive goose chase in college as to why do I believe in what I believe in, and where's my backing? Where's my historical backing? Yes, religion, obviously, every religion has faith in it. I'm not saying that's not important, but at the same time, these situations, if you believe in what you believe, they did happen. They're factually happening, and they're referenced in multiple cultures in multiple eras, in multiple languages. So I started basically doing religion studies, and with witches and witchcraft, this is more of a modern day, and this is a trilogy. And so it's more of a modern day take on Wiccans, and I wanted to make it very realistic. So I studied the Wiccan religion, and I mixed it a heck of a lot with Catholicism. I've incorporated into book 2 the 7 deadly sins, and I've created them to be humans, not humans, but they're princes of hell, basically. And so I've taken Catholicism and mixed it with my own fantasy in order to make it fit into the Wiccan kind of time frame. We talk about the triple moon goddess, if you're familiar with that. And also, too, these things are happening in actual places in the world. So Triora, Italy is in it was in the 1570s. There was actually a Salem witch trials in Triora, and a bunch of women died. They were imprisoned. Some of them killed themselves because they were in prisons for so long. It was very detrimental, but it was, again, these were women who were either the widows, or they were healers of some sort, or they were outspoken. And these women were basically accused of being witches, and they were, destroyed for that. And so this is very, close to me as well, because I am from Italian descent. And so I kind of wanted to also incorporate it, my Italian heritage, into this book as well. So this book, that is what the premise is of that book, is witches. You're going to kind of go through, and I don't want to give it too much away, but it's can't say too much yet because they haven't released it, but that's kind of what the premise is about that. And it's very modern. It's in modern day timing, whereas, Awakening the Dark Throne is more medieval-esque fantasy world. And yes, so yeah, you're going to be taken definitely on a journey through different realms. You're going to go to, you're going to go to hell, you're going to go to heaven, you're going to go purgatory in this book. Everything's very, very relatable, and something, and situations and religious facts that we have grown up with, if you are religious at all.
What did you learn about the writing craft while writing Awakening the Dark Throne that you were able to apply to your other books?
Yes, so I think writing is a continual journey. So again, as I mentioned, I have written 3 series thus far. They're not all complete yet, but I have 3 different stories going. And the first one I actually wrote was called the Mourn series. And this was back in like 2019. And I just took off writing. I didn't check about what agents were looking for, what publishing houses were looking for, what I didn't care. I didn't even know what like a word count really was. Like, why is that important? I don't know. I didn't care. I just started writing. I wanted to be creative, and I wrote. And actually, the Morn series, I'm going to go back to after I finish these 2 series and try to revive that. But that is a sci-fi fantasy, so it's a little bit different than these 2 books. So by the time I got done with book 1 of that series, it was 319,000 words. And I was like, oh, it's great. And I took it from like the Anne Rice standpoint, where I was detailing like how many speckles are on the ceiling, what colors are the vents, what colors are the curtains. I mean, it was just absolutely ridiculous. And some people love that. Like, some people are just like all about that. They're engrossed in it. Other people are like, absolutely not. Give me to the plot. So when I started trying to query it, I was getting obviously nowhere. And when I looked into it, it was like, oh, for your first debut novel, agents want 85 to 90,000 word manuscripts for fantasy. And I'm like, okay, I'm sitting here with 319,000 words. I don't know how I'm going to destroy, and leave it basically with a third of my book. And so I took a brief moment. I think I got book 2 of that one done, but I took a brief moment step back. And that is when Awakening the Dark Throne started coming to me. And I started getting more interested in that. And I think at that point, it was that was early into the pandemic in 2020. And fantasy books were just erupting. Sarah J. Maas was huge at the time with Throne of Glass and A Court of Thorns and Roses. She was just releasing her Crescent City book. These Hollow Vows were coming out. So all these different books were coming out kind of based in that Fae realm. And we already knew that the Fae realm was popular to begin with because you have things like Lord of the Rings and such that just have completely taken off from that standpoint. So I started constructing that, and I was honed more, very specific in what I was adding, what details I were adding, what scenes I were adding. I didn't add everything that went through my head because that was just going to be too excessive. And so then from there, I started querying that after I edited it, and I was still getting nowhere. And I was like, okay, how can I make this better? Well, they want to edit, they don't want to read, a bunch of errors on a page. And even though I'm an English major, editing a book and what they're looking for formatting wise in a book is completely different than anything my degree taught me. And so I went ahead, and one of my best friends, Kara, she started her own basically editing business. So she goes through all kinds of manuscripts and edits them. And so I asked her, and I was like, hey, she's also like a fantasy sci-fi nut as well. And she's very brutally honest. She would tell me like, no, it sucks, or you got something here. Very, very, very honest. So I went through her, and she's like, yes, I would love to. Like, this is going to be great practice for me. And so she took the manuscript and edited it. And then my life kind of picked up and went south for a little bit. And once I started getting back on my feet, I got back with her and connected with her and went through everything. And just through going through her edits alone, I learned so much. Just phrasing, making sure to stay in the person. Like, I like to write from first person. But like, instead of, for example, something that I definitely learned was like, if I'm writing through for first person, my character Genevieve, she's not going to know what another character is feeling at that moment. She can say, oh, based on the way he looks, or he furrowed his brow, I think he's frustrated, or something along the lines, but she's not going to say something along the lines of, or I wouldn't write, I would say, he furrowed his brow in frustration as he was deep in thought. She's not going to know that. So again, it's just like phrasing and words. And then once I got picked up by Australia House Press, that was a whole nother type of editing that I had never experienced before, because now they're formatting down into a book. All right. And I am a debut novelist. And like, that's another thing that I got a lot from my ARC readers is like, oh gosh, I wish this book was longer. I want more detail. Well, there's two reasons why I didn't do that. One, I'm a debut author. And until my name gets out there, there are requirements as to basically what a press house is going to put behind me as far as financial lateral in order to print these books to make sure that they get their return. And then two, also another like thing that came up was, why doesn't we do more world building? Why doesn't she see more of the world? Well, she's a slave 90% of this book. And so she's not going to have the freedom to go about and wander around the castle or wander around the world, just telling you all the details of the world. That's going to be more book two. So again, just going through those editing processes is where I think I learned the most. And even writing Witches of Triora, it's so much easier now to go back and edit because I know what they're looking for. I know how it's supposed to be formatted. I know what details they want. I know how to stay in voice, which is very important. And it also helps the editing process go a lot faster because editing, when you get into a manuscript, it takes anywhere from 2 to 4 months to edit a manuscript because they're looking for content details. They're looking for grammatical errors. They're looking for formatting guides, things of that nature. So it's a whole different type of beast that you're going to have to deal with when you're dealing with a larger press house.
I'm going to ask this as a point of clarification to something you said several minutes ago in the interview. You mentioned Awakening the Dark Throne is written from multiple points of view. Now, is it all first person from several different characters, all third person, or a mix of both?
It is all first person. I personally do not like when books switch from first to third person. I find that's very confusing, and I find it breaks the unless, some people may like it, but majority what I've heard, because again, I've actually I did a lot of polls as well before I started writing the book. So I asked them like what they would like to hear about, what they want, what person or what viewpoint they would like that. And a lot of people said they like first person because it's more personable. There are books that switch from first to third, and people are like, I honestly haven't met a person that likes that because they said it's very confusing. And also too, you have to be careful about when you switch back and forth from character viewpoints as well. I will reference Game of Thrones right here. I'm a huge Game of Thrones nut. I love Game of Thrones. But if you read the book, okay, like Game of Thrones, the TV show, and I don't want to get into it because the last season, blah. But the Game of Thrones TV show, you have like visual characters that you can connect stories to. In the book, you don't yet, and it jumps from person to person to person to person without telling you who is speaking. You kind of have to gather that from context clues, and that honestly breaks a reader. So I definitely wanted to make it very clear and concise. Like you stick with something your audience at that point is used to being in somebody's head and hearing from them. So the challenge now is to when I switch from character A to character B, I have to make sure that their voicing now changes, right? So if there's a phrase that Genevieve would say all the time, making sure that she's used. So, for example, she uses gods plural because she doesn't relate to a god, especially in this first book. Whereas her sister Lillian, who is the one that she sacrifices everything for, she believes in God as we know him today. So Jesus and the Father and all of that. So she says, oh, for heaven's sake or something like that. And, the elves might say, oh, for Valhalla's sake. So there's voicing there. There's also situations of how they would respond to a conflict. And that is actually I think my most challenging point because there are characters in the book where they're their own character. It's not me. And so they would respond, maybe with violence, whereas I would respond with love. And so I got to kind of keep that on track because that's building their character development. And that's what you expect of them. And so the fun part is learning about their history and why they respond that way and what made them and forged them into who they are at this point. So definitely I try to keep it very patternized. If my if my readers like what they're reading, I try to keep that going. That works for them. And I also base it off of my preference as well as a reader. What is the easiest for me to get hooked into a book? So first person for sure, you get the inside look into that person's head. You get their background story. You understand why they're thinking and how they're thinking. And then it's very cool when you switch to another point of view because now you almost get to see it from a different person's perspective. And you get to see your first original main character now through somebody else's eyes.
In addition to your writing work, since you've touched on the traditionally publishing process quite a bit, I don't really need to ask you about that since you've touched on it so much already. Mm-hmm. You're a fine arts teacher in a Kansas City, Missouri area public school. What is your job as a teacher like, and how do you balance teaching and writing books?
Yeah, so I am K through 12 certified in art, and then I'm 9 through 12 certified in English. And so my husband, I do have 2 children as well. And so my husband keeps me, helps me out a lot when it comes to like my home life and things like that. I definitely use the time that I have, whether it be weekends or holidays, to write. And again, I've already said I'm a compulsive writer. And so that means that when I basically get the story outlined in my head, and what I'll do for a little bit is I will like sleep on it, or I'll go take walks or long drives, usually do it. And I will record the movie in my head of my book. And then once I have that done, I have all the main points and the plots plotted out at that point. I will go back then and start writing it out and let the characters naturally take a hold. When that happens, I'm gone for like a week. So sometimes it's very challenging, especially when you have a full-time job. But again, I am type A personality, which means I am very organized. I know what is going on. I've been teaching now for 10 years. I can teach art like the back of my hand. And so just being diligent into, what I'm doing, staying on task and making sure that I'm following a schedule has helped out a lot. And again, being an art teacher, something that does a lot of time is the fact that I get to, the kids have a lot of studio time as well, where they're working on their own projects, where I'm not necessarily up in the front of the classroom teaching. I'm more one-on-one. And at that point too, sometimes it allows me a little bit of time to maybe do some extra research or, post something social media wise in order to promote my book, things of that nature. But for example, like Witches of True Aura, I wrote book 1 and 2 over Christmas break. And it was a compulsive writing situation where I just couldn't stop. I couldn't sleep because the characters wouldn't shut up until I got them down on the paper. So I'm definitely looking for this summer. I'm almost done with the 3rd book of Witches of Triora, about halfway through. And then this summer I will plan to finish book 4 and 5 of Awakening the Dark Throne.
This is probably going to be the closest thing I ask to a political question in this particular interview. Is teaching of the arts in K through 12 education here in the United States threatened? And if so, how?
I wouldn't say it's threatened. I will say that it does not get the attention it needs. And this is, and again, keep in mind, I have my business degree and my communications degree and my English degree. I loved school, history as well. I can teach history. The only thing I did not like was math. When you got me to trigonometry, I was like, nope, out of here. So, I mean, I understand definitely the importance of that, but at the same time, the way that our society is changing, I don't feel like there's, again, it's not focused upon. Whereas, if you were to have students failing in math or failing at on their English map tests and things of that nature, you would, and I've actually been through a district where they had, when they got back from COVID, we had very low map scores in both English and math. And I was on the part of the committee where we started creating homeroom lessons in order to support them and give them skills in order to get those map tests up. So it was like a whole school initiative. It was across middle schools. We shared the curriculum and everything like that with every middle school in our district. But with the arts, something that I noticed, which again, it's a double-edged sword because I do enjoy this. So it depends on who you are and what type of teacher you are. We don't have a curriculum. From my experience, the districts that I've taught in, and I teach currently in a very prosperous, very recognized district. That again, finances are not an issue for them. But something that I have noticed is that, like, again, we don't have a curriculum, whereas math and English and history and all that, they have curriculums. They have things that are already written out for them. They have assignments, they have tests, they have clear goals that they're trying to do. They have summative and formative assessments, all of the above. Art, they're like, go do what you want. And so, like, my argument currently right now is that the way that my school system is set up, it doesn't provide enough room for growth. My last school district, we had 3 sections of visual arts, and they were mixed in with 7th and 8th graders. So you could be in class with 7th or 8th graders. It was a mix. But the good thing about that is you took visual arts 1 and you all gained the same knowledge and the same skills. Then you moved on to visual arts 2 and you gained another level. And then by visual arts 3, somebody that started at visual arts 1 that was not able to draw a stick figure now was able to draw a full human face that was very realistic with all of the elements and principles that they needed in order to do that. In the district currently that I'm at right now doesn't have that type of structure where, you could skip art in 7th grade and take it in 8th grade, but you're missing all those skills. So you could be in a class with somebody who has taken art for 3 years with yourself who has never taken art since 5th grade. And so it doesn't really give that type of building block. And I think the benefit that I see from like a visual arts program is that you are teaching a child's brain to function differently. So for what I mean by that, for example, if you take like a student in English, from preschool, you are taught this is how you write. This is how you structure a sentence. This is how you structure a paragraph. This is what we are looking for. This is it's black and white. You are sticking a child in a box and telling them what they need to achieve. Whereas art, I'm going to give you a concept and now I'm going to tell you use your own imagination or use your own skill set now to create your own version of this. And so many times I get kids like, what do you mean? And honestly, it is more of those type A students where they're straight A students because you tell them what to do and they will do it. But now I'm telling them, no, you're going to decide on your own. And they get so confused and it stresses them out because they're not used to being able to think on their own without that blueprint of a square in which they're supposed to stay in. And I feel like that is contributing a lot to, this stagnant culture that we're beginning to experience because, a degree nowadays, people are now looking for individuals who have craftsmanship skills and who are going to trade schools because that's now dying. And there are so many debates, even at the Congress and the Senate level that they're like, okay, well, what is the benefit at this point of a degree in some of these industries? Because you get a piece of paper, you get yourself into $90,000 to $120,000 of debt just for an undergrad. Then what? Then you get a job making $50,000, but you have $120,000 in debt. It doesn't make sense at this point. So that's definitely something that I would see the art programs definitely changing because again, you're teaching a child to be different and be unique and stand on their own 2 feet and use their own mind in order to formulate outcomes to situations that might be difficult, that might be controversial, but again, that you're teaching them to think on their own. I think in education, that is what we are missing. This generation is missing. They're too spoon fed. They're too reliant on social media and what they hear from the television, and they're no longer used to having to dig for that answer and to research that answer in order to support their case or their stance.
Jessica, you were an incredibly insightful guest, and I thank you for appearing on Apollo Papyrus.
Thank you.
Jessica is one of the most interesting guests I've ever had the opportunity to interview on this podcast, and I wish her success with the rest of her fantasy series. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to write and read your passion. Bye for now. Remember to subscribe to the Apollo Papyrus YouTube channel at www.youtube.com/@ApolloPapyrus and the Apollo Papyrus Substack newsletter at apollopapyrus.substack.com. Y'all can visit the Apollo Papyrus website at campaaronapollo.wixsite.com/Apollo Papyrus and follow Apollo Papyrus on Threads, Instagram, Facebook, and Tumblr at Apollo Papyrus. Copyright 2024, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited, except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.